The lemonade was halfway to my lips when I heard my name echo off the perfectly manicured lawns of Willow Creek Estates. To our quiet genius, Elena Voss. Enjoy that $20,000 contribution to the Community Beautification Fund. You've been such an inspiration. Deborah Langley's voice sliced through the barbecue smoke and forced laughter like a lawnmower through wet grass. I froze. The plastic cup hovered midair as my pulse hammered against my temples. The HOA president stood on her makeshift stage, really just a folding table with a plastic tablecloth, beaming like she'd just cured cancer. Neighbors turned, glasses raised, that mix of envy and relief on their faces. The CFO of a neighborhood gossip mill, Mrs. Patterson, laughed a little too loud. The board secretary paused her sip of sweet tea and raised an eyebrow. The whole cul-de-sac tilted just a little in my direction. I forced a small smile, locked eyes with Deb across the crowd of pastel polo shirts and khakis, and said loud enough for the rule-obsessed ears to hear, "I never made that donation." You could hear the ice cubes melting in the silence that followed. Deb chuckled like I'd told a charming little joke, raising her glass higher. "Always so humble, Elena." She waved it off with the same manicured hand she'd used last month to fine old Mr. Reynolds for having his American flag up one day too long after Memorial Day. Only this time, her smile didn't reach those calculating eyes. Her lips said community spirit, but her stare said problem. "Hey, real quick, if you're the type who loves stories where one well-placed document slices deeper than any screaming match, smash that like button and subscribe." Most people watch these HOA Karen takedowns without subscribing, and it really helps us keep exposing these neighborhood dictators. Okay, back to the party. I took the sip anyway. The lemonade tasted like battery acid and broken rules. The party moved on. Kids chasing each other around the approved bounce house, men arguing about whose grill was more community-friendly, but I didn't. My mind was already spinning through every email, every meeting minutes, every bank statement I'd quietly saved. No transfer, no receipt, no email confirmation, nothing. I checked twice before leaving the house. As someone who spent 15 years in corporate compliance before buying into the suburban prison, I knew exactly how donations were supposed to be handled in this little fiefdom Deb called an association. The paperwork, the board approvals, the counter signatures, and most importantly, how my own governing documents had been amended 3 years ago after the last power-tripping president tried to pin a bogus assessment on me. Clause 7.12. It was buried in the covenants like a landmine under perfect sod. Dry, legal, boring as hell. But in the right hands, it could burn Deb's entire little empire to the ground. She didn't know that. But the board treasurer might have suspected something when she saw the way I didn't clap along with everyone else. I stayed at the party just long enough to not raise more suspicion. Long enough to watch Deb double air kiss the retired judge's wife and brag about her transformative leadership in keeping our property values pristine. Long enough to overhear 2 board members joke that I was probably going to spend my 20 grand on more boring beige curtains that matched the HOA-approved palette. Let them laugh. Let them toast to my phantom generosity. That one careless lie was going to be the spark. Monday morning, the neighborhood looked the same on the surface. Lawns mowed to exactly 3 inches. Mailboxes all the same shade of heritage black. But I knew better. I opened my home office folder, labeled simply HOA Notes. The one the nosy neighbors would never suspect contained years of screenshots, meeting recordings, perfectly legal in this state with one-party consent and metadata trails. It wasn't revenge. It was insurance. Because what Deb didn't know, what none of these clipboard warriors ever bothered to learn, was that Clause 7.12 wasn't just legalese. It was a tripwire. And she had just sprinted right over it in her sensible heels while the whole neighborhood watched. Back at my kitchen table, I opened the HOA portal on my laptop. No record of the 20,000. Not pending, not processed, just blank space where the money should have magically appeared if Deb's little performance had been real. So I went deeper. The treasurer's internal reports, the ones they only shared when someone filed the right form, had a line item under special resident recognition. My name, $20,000. Approved by board vote. Signed off. Elena Voss. Except I hadn't signed anything. The digital signature was there, but the metadata told a different story. Timestamp from an IP address that traced straight back to Deb's home office. Of course. The same woman who'd once asked me to backdate a violation notice because optics matter more than technicalities. I'd refused then. Apparently this time, she didn't ask. I pulled the audit logs, saved everything with timestamps, and uploaded it to my encrypted drive under the folder I'd labeled Clause 7.12 Prep 3 years earlier. Just in case. Just in case they ever got this sloppy and this bold. Because Clause 7.12 wasn't fluff. It was written after the previous president tried to bury financial irregularities by scapegoating residents like me. Any public attribution of financial benefit or refund to a homeowner without verified, documented, and actually disbursed payment shall trigger immediate third-party forensic audit of all association finances, with full disclosure to every member within 48 hours. Binding. Irrevocable. Overseen by an independent CPA, firm named in the bylaws. I'd fought to get it passed during the last big revision. They thought it was harmless legalese from the uptight lawyer lady. They signed off without reading the fine print, just like always. Deb had just activated it in front of witnesses. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the perfectly edged lawn across the street. Somewhere in her palace on the corner lot, Deb was probably still patting herself on the back for her brilliant PR move. She had no idea the fuse was already burning. I didn't knock. I didn't warn. I didn't lace it with small talk. At 9:12 a.m., I forwarded the email. Subject line, unchanged. Attachments untouched. One sentence in the body. Referred to Clause 7.12, page 14. I watched the read receipt ping 5 minutes later. Margaret Klein, the board secretary who'd spent 10 years babysitting Deb's visionary initiatives, opened it at 9:17. She didn't respond. Not at 9:20. Not at 9:30. Not even when I passed her driveway on my evening walk and caught a flash of panic in her eyes as she clicked rapidly between screens on her phone. At 9:42, her garage door slammed with a thud that made the dog next door flinch. And at 9:45, my phone lit up with a call from the HOA treasurer. I didn't answer. I didn't need to because at 9:48, Margaret called Deb directly and she didn't call from her cell. She used the conference line speaker on. I knew because the line echoed and I'd routed my monitor feed through the compliance audio queue last year after they accidentally left me off a call about vendor security loopholes I'd found. Deb picked up breezy as ever. Margaret, don't tell me you're about to make me sit through another clause breakdown. I haven't even had my iced latte. There was no humor in Margaret's voice. You named Elena publicly. You referenced a donation, one that doesn't exist. A pause. Then what? It's symbolic. I'll push it through later this week. No, Deborah. Margaret's tone went from clipped to lethal. You used her name in a financial statement context in front of half the neighborhood while reporting quarterly dues usage. That's attribution. Without compensation, that's misrepresentation. Deb scoffed. It's just a party. No one's filing with the state over a toast. Clause 7.12, Deborah. Another pause. Longer this time. What the hell is Clause 7.12? Margaret sighed. You could hear the rustling of paper, her flipping pages, the weight of her silence thickening. Then she read it aloud. Every word, each one sharper than the last. In the event the homeowner's name is used in any internal or external communications, verbal or written, pertaining to financial disbursements or acknowledgments without executed payment or documented approval, a forensic audit shall be initiated within 48 hours overseen by an independent third party as outlined in Section 11 in accordance with state disclosure standards. Deb finally stopped breathing. You're telling me she baked in an automatic audit trigger? Yes, Margaret said flatly. And it's binding. It was added post-flagpole fiasco and you just activated it in front of the entire block. His voice dropped. Can't we just retroactively issue the donation? No, you can't unwind public misstatement with hush money. This isn't just an HOA fumble, Deborah. This is material misrepresentation. It opens us to compliance review. It exposes every executive perk tied to dues metrics, and it cannot be untriggered. Silence. Then Deb muttered the dumbest thing she could have said. Why the hell would someone like her have a clause like that? I leaned back in my chair, eyes closed. Because someone like me knew the storm was always coming. I just didn't know which idiot would light the match first. Now we both knew. And the fuse was lit. They didn't come crashing into my driveway with sirens blaring. No, they were smarter than that. Or at least thought they were. It started with a calendar invite. Subject line, clarification review, Q3 dues documentation, sent by Lisa in the treasurer's office. Polite, vague, the kind of request that pretends to be routine even though everyone in the loop knew exactly what it meant. They booked the community center, the sad one with the flickering fluorescent light and the dry erase board that still had teamwork equals double dollars, half erased from someone's failed motivational sprint. I arrived 2 minutes early. Lisa was already there along with 2 board drones I'd seen, but never spoken to. Not a single senior executive in sight, which told me exactly how scared they were. Lisa started with the usual fluff. Thanks for joining us, Elena. We're just walking through donation approvals from last quarter and making sure all the I's are dotted, T's crossed. You know how it is. I nodded once. You want to know if I approve the $20,000 donation attributed to me? All 3 of them shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of the board guys coughed. Lisa smiled like I was a toddler who'd said a bad word. It's just a light review. I pulled out a manila folder and slid it across the table. Here's the full email thread from my inbox and outbox between June 1st and September 30th. No mention of a donation, no approval request, no signed document. She reached for it, but I wasn't done. This, I said, placing a second sheet on top, is a screenshot of the HOA portal log. No access for my credentials on the date the donation was allegedly signed. I flipped the page. This is the audit trail for document ID number Q3FIN238. It shows a digital signature under my name, time-stamped 11:22 p.m. on a Sunday night. Odd hour, one of the board guys mumbled. Not for someone in Deb's home office, I said, turning to the next page. This is the VPN log for that timestamp. Access from an IP range registered to Deborah Langley's personal router. And this, I slid a final sheet across the table, is a comparison of my digital signature hash versus the one used on the document. They don't match. Lisa went pale. The board guys were no longer making eye contact. You forged a financial record with my name in a state-regulated association. That's not just a mistake. That's criminal misrepresentation. To her credit, Lisa tried to regroup. We're still gathering facts. There could have been a clerical misrouting or permissions overlap. These things happen. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of the moment settle. No, they don't. And that's when I reminded them calmly, almost gently, that clause 7.12 didn't just initiate a forensic audit. It also triggered a mandatory retention policy. Every email, every document, every Slack message, text, and internal memo relating to dues disbursement was now under legal lock. That meant no deleting, no editing, no quietly cleaning up records. Their eyes widened like I just flipped the lights on during a robbery. Because what they needed was for this to be a one-off, a rogue assistant, a silly error, something they could bury under jargon and forget. But now they were trapped. And worse, I had just made sure the trap stayed open because I'd seen this kind of thing before, just never with my name attached. I'd flagged irregular donation entries. I'd warned about vague approvals. I'd submitted 3 memos in the past 2 years outlining signature protocol abuse. They were all ignored. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a system, a deliberate one. And now the system had coughed up the wrong name. Mine. I stood, collected my folder, and said one final thing before walking out. I'm not the one who should be worried about documentation right now. You are. They called it a confidential consultation. I called it what it was, a containment strategy with coffee and muffins. The community center was nicer this time. Leather chairs, real coffee, not a single flickering light, and the people inside didn't work for Willow Creek Estates. They were from Frampton and Klein LLP, outside counsel, specialists in regulatory exposure and internal investigations. The kinds of lawyers who don't blink when words like state audit or criminal liability get tossed around. The lead counsel, a woman named Marissa Trent, gave me a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes and gestured to the seat across from her. MS. Voss, she said, thanks for joining us on short notice. I sat, folded my hands on the table, and waited. Marissa tapped the folder in front of her. We've completed our initial review of Q3 dues adjustments. Your clause grants you both standing and protection under state disclosure rules. And more importantly, it opens a pathway to forensic inquiry. She flipped the folder open and pulled out a single page. This is why you were invited today. It was a payout table. Board perks across the executive slate. Highlighted in yellow were 3 members: treasurer, secretary, and president. All 3 showed a 12% increase in administrative fees. And in the footnote, justification was listed: departmental synergy validated by independent resident performance metrics, notably Elena Voss, $20,000. They used me. They used my name, my phantom donation as a benchmark to justify their own hikes. Marissa continued, her voice steady. Your forged donation entry was key to the inflation model. The president and her office manipulated baseline payouts. Your approval gave them cover. In reality, they padded their numbers using you as an ethical fig leaf. I blinked slowly, not surprised. Just exhausted. And let me guess, I said, none of them had clauses like mine. She shook her head. No, only you. Because 3 years ago, when the previous board tried to spin my signature into a licensing payout for a gate upgrade I didn't authorize, I knew the problem wasn't just them. It was the culture. Everyone else renegotiated their covenants to maximize property value perks. I rewrote mine like a damn autopsy report. I buried my protections under layers of compliance language, so dry it made the board's eyes glaze over. But it worked because I wasn't looking for fame. I was looking for a fuse. And now it had detonated. We're not asking you to lead the investigation, Marissa said, but we are asking for your cooperation. Your clause, your documentation makes you the most credible internal witness we have. I nodded slowly. What happens to the president? She's already on administrative leave. Her assistant resigned this morning. We're moving to preserve digital communications across all departments effective immediately. I glanced at the folder again. The same names who used to roll their eyes when I brought up outdated retention schedules, now frozen under audit flags. You realize, I said, they laughed when I insisted on that clause. Marissa finally smiled. No one's laughing now. I didn't want this war. I wasn't after power. All I ever wanted was for the numbers to be real. For the signatures to mean something, for the systems we built to actually work. But now that the house was on fire, I'd be damned if they blamed the smoke on me. By Wednesday morning, the executive cul-de-sac was bleeding. First came the email. Effective immediately, President Deborah Langley has been placed on administrative leave pending internal review. No subject line capital letters. No regret to inform. Just cold HOA bloodletting. Then came the second one 2 hours later. Board secretary no longer with the association. That one didn't even bother explaining. I watched from my front porch, sipping burned coffee from the community kiosk while Deb paced the glass corridor of her McMansion like a trapped wolf in a pastel cage. Word was she tried to convene a private clarification call with Frampton and Klein that morning. It lasted 11 minutes. She hung up looking like she'd aged a decade. No one had read my covenants. Not really. They'd skimmed it like a bedtime story, flipping past the long paragraphs, sighing at the legalese. They saw a quiet woman asking for precision and assumed I didn't know how the game worked. But I did. I just wrote the rules down while they were too busy congratulating themselves. The audit firm named in my clause, Donovan Laugh Forensic Compliance Specialist, was already embedded by Thursday. Per the clause, they didn't need board approval, just verified trigger evidence, which they now had in droves. Every payout from the last 8 quarters, every approved donation, every time someone used my name like a golden stamp on a corrupt system. Deb tried to walk it back as if HOA fraud could be resolved with a clean press release and some light gaslighting. She called a town hall, mumbling about misunderstandings and internal oversights. The lead investor, the biggest dues payer, didn't attend. He called his own emergency meeting instead, smaller, private, on-site. That's where everything truly turned. They asked me to join, not as a witness, as an authority. There were no cameras, no flashy intros, just a quiet room, 6 people, and a hard copy binder with my name on it. The lead dues payer, a man named Charles Beale, sharp-eyed and terrifying in his silence, sat across from me with a binder open to clause 7.12. We reviewed the language, he said, tapping the page. You structured this clause with foresight. You knew something like this would happen. I didn't know who would trigger it, I replied calmly. But yes. He nodded once, then turned to Deb. Who else used falsified benchmarks to inflate board perks? He asked. Deb stammered. We were still identifying patterns. There are anomalies, but they're not necessarily fraud. Wrong answer, Beale said flatly. We don't guess, we audit. Elena, what's your recommendation? Deb's face went pale. It took her too long to realize it. She was no longer running the room. I was. And I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I didn't lean back like I'd won because this wasn't a victory lap. This was cleanup. Start with Q2 of last year, I said. That's when the first discrepancies appeared, and you'll want to subpoena Slack archives. Most of their approvals didn't happen over email. Beale scribbled a note. Deb just stared at me, stunned. I met her eyes once long enough for her to understand what had always been true. My calm wasn't passive. It was calculated. She thought silence meant invisibility. Turns out it was insulation. And now the temperature had dropped below freezing. The folder was black, unbranded, no label, just a quiet hinge creaking as I opened it in front of the executive committee like it was any other status update. I didn't bring a laptop. I didn't need charts or slides. This wasn't a performance. It was a reckoning. 10 people sat around the glass table, pretending to be busy with papers they'd already memorized. Deb was 2 seats to my left, stiff in her chair, sweating through her collar even though the AC was running cold. The president's seat remained empty. So did the secretaries. Their names had been stripped from the meeting packet. Just white space now. The outside auditor, Dana Laugh from Donovan's forensic unit, sat across from me. Gray suit, tight expression, zero tolerance for nonsense. She gave a small nod as I placed the folder in front of her, then pushed it gently across the table. 5 years of donation attribution irregularities, I said. Sorted by quarter, cross-referenced against performance reports, system access logs, and unauthorized signature discrepancies. Every flagged entry either went uninvestigated, was marked resolved without confirmation, or was closed by the same executive who approved the original disbursement. I paused. No one said a word. Dana flipped it open. Page 1, Q1, FY20. Executive Adjustment Entry Number 29. The donation was approved due to synergistic community realignment for a board member who hadn't attended a single planning meeting that quarter. Next page. Q2 FY20. Another donation tag to increased regional ROI justified using a PowerPoint from an intern who was never credited and who had since left the association. Page after page, I'd included the original justification, the manipulated benchmarks, and the missing or falsified documentation. Every entry had metadata. Everyone had been flagged by me in internal systems. Everyone had been ignored. I didn't narrate. I let the silence explain what the words didn't have to. When Dana reached the last page, she looked up slowly. This, she said, tapping the folder with a short fingernail. Enough for criminal referral. No one exhaled. She turned to the dues payer rep from Beale Capital. We'll begin immediate escalation. State gets the first copy. DOJ gets the second. I recommend executive level counsel for everyone named more than twice in this file. Deb looked like a woman watching her own obituary get drafted in real time. She opened her mouth, but I beat her to it gently. I tried reporting all of this before, I said without malice. I submitted documentation to the board. I sent alerts through our internal system. 3 times, I escalated to the compliance committee. Each time I was told the issue was under review or that the matter was closed. The irony? I never asked for this seat at the table. I never wanted it. They ignored every flag I raised. Not because I was wrong, but because they believed I was small, a detail, a woman with folders and footnotes and quiet eyes who didn't understand how high-value neighborhoods work. But I did. I just documented everything while they were too busy building glass towers with forged receipts. Dana closed the folder. We'll take it from here, she said firmly. The meeting ended with no goodbyes, no handshakes, just slow, stunned silence as executives quietly exited one by one, eyes down, unsure which of them had just been sentenced by proxy. Deb lingered near the door, jaw tight. I didn't speak to her, didn't even look her way. I just stood up, collected the now empty folder, and walked out. Power wasn't something I grabbed. It was something they handed me, one ignored flag at a time. The board didn't call a vote. They never do when it's about saving face. They called it emergency action to protect fiduciary integrity. The kind of language that sounds like a wet napkin, but hits like a firing squad. At 8:03 a.m., a statement hit inboxes association-wide. Effective immediately, President Deborah Langley is suspended from executive duties pending full external review. No speech, no final bow. Just her name, stripped bare of title, tucked between legal ease and a line about commitment to transparency. By 9 a.m., the board secretary's resignation followed. For personal reasons, of course, the kind of resignation that doesn't come with cake or a Zoom farewell. She slipped out quietly, probably before the auditor could schedule her exit interview. I read both announcements over oatmeal on my porch alone. When I walked into the 9th floor community center for the next compliance restructuring session, the air was different, stale, uncertain. The vultures hadn't shown up for blood. They showed up to count the corpses and try to guess how many were left standing. Beale Capital's rep Charles was already seated. No coffee this time. No pretense of charm. MS. Voss, he said, motioning to the seat beside him. Thank you for being here. Like I had a choice. He tapped the contract packet in front of him. We're initiating a full compliance rebuild. For the time being, the board is recommending you act as internal liaison between legal, audit, and the membership until the third-party review is complete. I didn't nod. I didn't smile. I simply said, understood. This wasn't ambition. This wasn't a title. This was triage. Charles looked me dead in the eye. I'm not asking you to play nice. I'm asking you to keep this place from burning down. Can you do that? Yes, I replied. But you won't like how it gets done. Around the table were people who had snickered when I'd pointed out covenant errors, who had rolled their eyes when I'd requested extra validation steps. One board member once told me, your obsession with signatures made you feel important. Another said, you slowed things down when you flagged irregular approval paths. Now they were waiting for my instruction. Now I was the one deciding who stayed on what access list. I laid out the plan without emotion. Staff interviews, immediate hold on all performance disbursements, revocation of legacy access for any suspended or exited execs, real-time audit logs routed through legal, not ops, and above all, no documents move without countersign verification. Not anymore. No one protested, not a single eye roll. Silence had a new shape now, and it looked a lot like compliance. When the meeting ended, I stayed behind to collect the packets. One of the junior board analysts paused on her way out. I didn't know you'd been watching all of this that long. I wasn't watching, I said. I was documenting. The difference was everything. By noon, I was seated in Deb's former office. The nameplate was gone. The desktop background still showed a yacht she didn't own. I didn't touch anything. I didn't unpack. I didn't even adjust the chair. This wasn't my throne. It was my crime scene. And I was here to preserve every fingerprint they thought no one would ever find. The board gave me limited authority. Compliance lead, special advisor, liaison to audit counsel. No one dared offer president. They knew I wouldn't take it. I wasn't here to inherit the machine. I was here to rewire it, so the next woman with a folder and a spine didn't need to weaponize silence to be heard. I drafted the new clause on a legal pad that afternoon. One line. All governing documents shall include a mandatory clause read confirmation signed, time-stamped, and notarized by the homeowner and one legal officer prior to final execution. The VP of Legal raised an eyebrow when I submitted it. I raised nothing in return. At 6:14 p.m., I signed the document myself. The same pen, the same precision. Across the office, the lights dimmed on an auto timer. No party, no speech, no champagne flute raised in my direction. Just the blinking cursor in our compliance portal confirming upload status. Complete. And that was the thing they never understood. I didn't want to run the association. I didn't want a title. All I ever wanted was accuracy. But silence. Silence writes the last paragraph.